Our next seam for our sewing sample is an inward curve. And the inward curve uses the same pattern piece as the outward curve. So the first thing we need to do is to pin our pattern piece onto our fabric. And you'll notice here that I've placed the pins parallel to the cutting edge, or where I'm going to cut. And the reason for that is I can't cut through metal. So if I had them going across, it would cause problems. So you want to pin quite a bit around to hold the pattern piece in place. You want to make sure the corners are held down because they're the part that's likely to bounce. So I'm just going to quickly cut out my pattern pieces. And I want to cut as close to the paper as I can without cutting through the paper because the fabric scissors are not for paper. Also, when you're cutting, you need to make sure that your scissors are straight up and down and not on an angle like this or like this, because you will cut the fabrics to be different sizes and things won't line up. So you want to make sure they're as straight up and down as possible. When you're cutting curves or inward curves, you just want to use the end part or the center part of your scissors. So you'll notice I'm not closing the tips, I'm not actually getting anywhere near to the tips. Okay, so there's my lovely strawberry shortcake fabric cut out. So I unpin my pattern. I put my pattern piece aside because I'm going to need it for the next sample. I'm going to take my strawberry shortcake fabric and I'm going to place them right sides together now, just like in the plain seam. Right sides together like this. And since I'm going to do the inward curve, I'm going to pin that side shut. So now, unlike when I was cutting, my pins are now perpendicular to the cut edge. And the right sides are kissing. And we're ready to sew. So same as before, I'm going to start at one end, and I'm going to line it up with the 15 line and put it slightly under the needle. I'm going to put my presser foot down, turn my hand wheel and put the needle in, find my foot control, and I'm going to sew forward a little bit, and I'm going to sew back to lock in my stitches and then start sewing forward. Now this one's tricky. Where I want to look on my line, on the throat plate, is where it's parallel to the needle. If I'm looking here as I try and turn the corner, I'm not going to be sewing at the right distance. So I need to make sure I'm looking where the part is being sewn. So that is tip number one. So I'm just going to turn it, and as I come to the pins, I'm going to take them out. Just slowly around the curve. Remember, you don't need a lot of pressure to get around, to turn fabric on a sewing machine. It's just a gentle pressure. But I'm still watching up here. And I get to the other end, back stitch. Now this one needs a few other steps than the plain seam did. Because if I was to try and turn this right side out where my seam is and flip it over, there's going to be a huge amount of fabric in there, and it's hard to turn, or won't stretch to turn. So on the inward curve, what we need to do is we need to do something called clipping. And clipping is when I take my scissors, I put use just the tips, so make sure I'm not going to cut through my seam, and we're going to put little lines, cut lines, about ½ an inch apart, all the way along. Make sure you don't clip through your stitching, because then you've just put a hole in your garment, or in this case, sewing sample. Ta-da! So now I have a very, very flexible sample. I can actually turn it into a straight line, and when I go to turn it right side out, it will lay nice and flat. So our next step is to press.
Yeah.